Staff Sergeant Marcus Tank. Rodriguez was enjoying his first real leave in 18 months when the doorbell rang at his small apartment in San Diego. He glanced at the clock on his coffee table, 22:47 hours. Way too late for visitors, especially on a Tuesday night. His hand instinctively moved toward the service pistol he kept in a drawer, a habit that never left even during peacetime. The doorbell rang again, followed by what sounded like whispered voices. Children's voices. Tank approached the door cautiously, his bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. He peered through the peephole and saw nothing but darkness. Then he heard it, a soft sobbing sound that made his chest tighten. Despite every tactical instinct screaming at him to be careful, he couldn't ignore the sound of crying children. He opened the door slowly, keeping the chain lock engaged. "Hello?" Two small figures stood in the dim hallway light. At first glance, they looked like young girls, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing tattered clothes that seemed too big for their tiny frames. But as Tank's eyes adjusted, he noticed something wasn't quite right. Their skin had a subtle blue tint, and their eyes were larger than normal, with an almost luminescent quality in the darkness. "Please," one of them whispered in perfect English, though her voice carried a strange melodic quality. "We need help. They told us to find the warrior with the eagle, globe, and anchor." Tank's eyes narrowed. The eagle, globe, and anchor, the Marine Corps' emblem. Someone had specifically directed these children to find a Marine. His instincts were going haywire, but the tears streaming down their faces looked real enough. "Who told you that?" he asked, not removing the chain. "Our mother," the second girl said, her voice barely audible. "Before they killed her." The words hit Tank like a physical blow. He'd seen enough war orphans to recognize genuine grief regardless of species. And species, that's what he was looking at. These weren't human children, but they were definitely children, and they were scared. "Step back," he said gently, closing the door to remove the chain. When he opened it again, he knelt down to their eye level. "I'm going to ask you some questions, okay? But first, are you hurt? Are you hungry?" The girls looked at each other, communicating in a way that reminded Tank of the silent coordination he'd seen between longtime battle buddies. The first girl nodded. "We haven't eaten in 3 days. The food synthesizers on our ship stopped working after the attack." Ship, attack. Tank's mind raced through possibilities, but he pushed the speculation aside. These kids needed immediate help, and he could figure out the rest later. "Come in," he said, standing aside. "Slowly. Keep your hands where I can see them." The girls entered his apartment with careful steps, their large eyes taking in everything. Tank noticed they moved with an unusual grace, almost floating across the floor. "Sit on the couch," he instructed, pointing to his worn leather sofa. "I'm going to get you some food." "Do you eat the same things humans do?" "Yes," the second girl said. "Our biology is compatible with most human nutrition sources. Mother always said we were cousins, separated by the stars but born from the same ancient seed." Tank paused in his movement toward the kitchen. The way she spoke, the vocabulary, the concept, these weren't ordinary children, regardless of their appearance. He returned with 2 glasses of milk and some leftover pizza, watching as they ate with desperate hunger but perfect manners. While they ate, he studied them more carefully. Their clothes, which had seemed like rags at first, were actually made of some kind of advanced material that seemed to repair itself as he watched. The blue tint to their skin was more pronounced under his apartment lights, and he could see faint patterns beneath the surface, like circuit boards made of light. "What are your names?" he asked, settling into his chair across from them. "I am Zara," the first girl said. "This is my sister Kira. We are from the Arcturus system, 4th planet in what you would call the Buddha's constellation." Tank blinked. "You're aliens." "Yes," Kira said matter-of-factly. "Though we prefer Arcturian. We've been watching your species for many cycles. Your military specifically. Mother was part of a research team studying human warfare capabilities." "Why?" Tank asked, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know the answer. Zara's large eyes filled with tears again. "Because the hegemony is coming. They've already destroyed 17 civilizations in our local cluster. Mother's team was trying to find allies, species that might be able to help resist them." "The hegemony?" "A galactic empire," Kira explained, her young voice carrying the weight of ancient fear. "They consume entire worlds, strip them of resources, enslave or eliminate the native populations. They've been expanding for thousands of years, and they're heading toward this sector of the galaxy." Tank felt a chill run down his spine. "And they killed your mother?" 3 days ago, Zara whispered. They found our research station hidden in the asteroid belt of your outer system. Mother managed to get us to an escape pod before... She broke down completely, her tiny shoulders shaking with sobs. Tank's training warred with his humanity. Everything about this situation screamed setup, trap, or psychological warfare. But the grief in these children's cries was too real, too raw to be fabricated. How did you get here? He asked gently. To Earth, I mean. Mother's emergency protocols, Kira said, wrapping her arms around her sister. The escape pod was programmed to bring us here to your planet. She said if anything happened to her, we should find a United States Marine and tell them what's coming. Why a Marine specifically? The girls looked at each other again, and Tank saw something that made his blood run cold, hope mixed with desperate determination. Because? Zara said, wiping her eyes. Mother's research showed that Marines never retreat, never surrender, and the hegemony has never encountered anyone like that before. Tank stared at these two small beings who had somehow crossed the void of space to knock on his door in the middle of the night, carrying news that would change everything humanity thought it knew about its place in the universe. Outside his window, the lights of San Diego twinkled peacefully, unaware that everything was about to change. Tank spent the next hour listening to the most incredible and terrifying briefing of his life. The girls spoke in turns, their young voices describing horrors that no child should have witnessed. Zara pulled out what looked like a crystalline tablet from her pocket, its surface immediately lighting up with three-dimensional holographic displays that made Tank's smartphone look like a stone tool. This is the hegemony's advanced fleet, Kira said, manipulating the hologram with tiny finger gestures. The display showed massive ships, each one easily the size of Manhattan, moving through space like predatory sharks. They're still 6 months away from your solar system, but their reconnaissance probes have already mapped your defensive capabilities. Tank leaned forward, studying the alien technology with professional interest. What do you mean, defensive capabilities? We don't have any space defenses. Exactly, Zara said quietly. According to their analysis, Earth's civilization is classified as level 1 on the Kardashev scale. Pre-interstellar. No energy shields, no plasma weapons, no faster-than-light travel. By hegemony standards, you should be conquered in approximately 17 hours. Should be? Tank caught the emphasis. The girls exchanged another of their silent communications. Mother's research suggested otherwise, Kira explained. She spent 2 years studying human military history, tactics, and psychology. The hegemony has conquered 47 different species, but they've all followed similar patterns. Tank settled back in his chair, his mind switching into the analytical mode that had kept him alive through 3 combat deployments. What patterns? Centralized command structures, Zara began, counting on her small fingers. Logical decision-making processes, clear hierarchies, predictable responses to overwhelming force. When faced with certain defeat, every species they've encountered has either surrendered immediately or fought conventionally until annihilated. Humans are different, Kira continued. Mother found over 3,000 documented cases of human military units fighting to the last person against impossible odds. Not because it was logical, but because it was right. The Alamo, Thermopylae, the Warsaw Uprising, Chosin Reservoir. Tank felt a chill of recognition. She studied Marine Corps history specifically, didn't she? Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Fallujah, Zara confirmed. Human Marines have never encountered an enemy they considered unbeatable. Even when facing certain death, they adapt, improvise, and fight harder. The hegemony's conquest algorithms don't account for that, Kira added. They expect rational actors making rational decisions. They don't expect a species that gets more dangerous when cornered. Tank stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the sleeping city. 6 months. If these girls were telling the truth, humanity had 6 months before first contact turned into a war for survival. And the enemy had never lost. Your mother, he said without turning around. What happened to her research? The data she collected? Destroyed, Zara said, her voice breaking slightly. She transmitted what she could to the emergency beacon in our escape pod, but most of it was lost when the station exploded. What's left? Kira held up the crystal tablet. Tactical assessments of hegemony weapons and ship designs, limited information about their command structure, and Mother's final recommendations. Tank turned back to face them. Which were? Find the Marines, Zara said simply. Tell them what's coming. Let them do what Marines do. And what exactly do Marines do that's so special? Tank asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. They win, Kira replied with the absolute certainty that only children could possess. Mother's research showed that Marine units have never accepted defeat as an option. They don't fight to delay the enemy or buy time for retreat. They fight to win completely and permanently. Tank considered this. The girls were asking him to believe that their mother, an alien scientist, had somehow identified the one human military organization capable of stopping a galactic empire that had conquered nearly 50 other species. It sounded insane. It also sounded exactly like the kind of impossible mission Marines specialized in. "Show me what you have," he said. For the next 2 hours, Tank studied the intelligence the girls possessed. The holographic displays showed hegemony ship designs, weapon capabilities, and tactical doctrines. Their technology was clearly superior to anything on Earth, but Tank's experienced eye spotted something interesting. They fought like they'd never lost. Their formations were optimized for overwhelming force against weaker opponents, not for facing desperate resistance. "They're used to winning fast," he muttered, studying a display showing typical hegemony battle tactics: shock and awe, massive superiority, quick surrender. "They've never had to fight a prolonged campaign against someone who refuses to quit." Exactly what Mother concluded, Zara said excitedly. She believed humans might be the first species to turn the hegemony's own success against them. Tank closed the holographic display and looked at the two small figures sitting on his couch. They'd finished the pizza and were now sharing a bag of cookies he'd found in his kitchen, looking for all the world like ordinary children having a sleepover. Except ordinary children didn't carry tactical intelligence about an approaching alien invasion. "All right," he said, "assuming I believe all this, and I'm not saying I do yet, what exactly are you asking me to do?" "I'm one Marine. I can't fight an entire galactic empire by myself." "You don't have to fight them alone," Kira said. "You just have to convince your leaders to prepare for war instead of first contact." "And how am I supposed to do that? Walk into the Pentagon and tell them aliens are coming? They'll put me in a psych ward." Zara held up her crystal tablet again. Mother anticipated this problem. She programmed the emergency beacon to record everything that happened at the research station, including her death. The holographic display activated again, but this time it showed a recording. Tank watched as an older version of the girls, clearly their mother, worked frantically at alien control panels while explosions rocked the station around her. Her voice, speaking in the same melodic accent as her daughter's, provided a running commentary as she prepared the escape pod. "The probe data shows the hegemony fleet changing course toward Earth," she said in the recording, her hands flying over controls. "They detected our research activities. They know we've been studying the humans." An explosion knocked her to her knees, but she continued working. "If anyone receives this message, find the Marines. Show them what's coming. They're the only ones who can teach humanity to fight like humans instead of like conquered prey." The recording showed her final moments as she sealed her daughters into the escape pod. Her last words a desperate plea. "Tell the Marines that sometimes the impossible is just another word for necessary." Tank felt something cold and hard settling in his stomach. The recording was either the most sophisticated piece of disinformation he'd ever seen, or it was real. And if it was real, then 2 refugee children had just made him responsible for preparing humanity for its first interstellar war. "Your mother was right about one thing," he said finally. "Marines don't believe in impossible missions, but we also don't fight wars alone." "What do you mean?" Zara asked. Tank looked at his phone, calculating time zones and wondering how he was going to explain this to his commanding officer. "I mean, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. And that means bringing in the Corps." He picked up his phone and started scrolling through his contacts. 6 months to prepare for war against an enemy that had never lost. Time to find out if the hegemony had ever faced an enemy that had never believed in losing. The phone call to Gunnery Sergeant Patricia Hayes didn't go well. "Rodriguez, do you have any idea what time it is?" Hayes' voice crackled through the speaker, clearly annoyed at being woken up at 0300. "This better be good." "Gunny, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Tank said, glancing at the 2 girls who were watching him with hopeful eyes. "I've got a situation here that's way above my pay grade, but it's something Command needs to know about immediately." "What kind of situation? And why are you calling me instead of going through proper channels?" Tank had considered that. Going through normal channels would mean reporting to his company commander, who would report to the battalion commander, who would eventually report to someone who might take it seriously. By then, valuable time would be lost and the story would be filtered through multiple layers of skepticism. Hayes, on the other hand, was different. She'd served with Force Reconnaissance for 8 years before becoming a DI, had connections throughout the Corps, and most importantly, she'd saved Tank's life in Afghanistan when she was a corporal, and he was a brand new lance corporal who'd walked into an ambush. Because this involves potential national security threats, and you're the only person I trust who has direct access to Colonel Morrison, Tank said. Morrison was the base commander at Pendleton, and Hayes had been his senior drill instructor when he was a young lieutenant going through officer candidate school. Rodriguez, you're starting to worry me. What the hell is going on? Tank took a deep breath. Gunny, I need you to come to my apartment. Bring your laptop and make sure you can establish a secure connection to Quantico. And Gunny, bring your sidearm. There was a long pause. Tank, are you in some kind of trouble? Not the kind you're thinking. But I've got 2 refugees here who are claiming their people were attacked by what they're calling a galactic empire, and they've got evidence. Another pause. Rodriguez, have you been drinking? Stone cold sober, Gunny, and I've been looking at their evidence for the last 3 hours. Either these are the most sophisticated special effects I've ever seen, or we're about to have a very bad day in about 6 months. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Hayes said. And Rodriguez, if this is some kind of joke, I'm going to make your life very unpleasant. 23 minutes later, Hayes was standing in Tank's apartment, staring at Zara and Kira with the expression of someone whose worldview was being systematically dismantled. The girls had demonstrated their holographic technology, shown the recorded destruction of their research station, and answered every technical question Hayes could think of with precise, detailed responses. Their ship is parked in orbit around the moon, Tank explained, showing Hayes the tracking data on the crystal tablet. Cloaked, but they can make it visible to any Earth-based telescope if we need verification. Hayes sat heavily in Tank's chair, her hand unconsciously resting on her service pistol. This is way beyond anything I've dealt with. We need to get this to the Pentagon immediately. I agree, Tank said. But we need to be careful about how we present it. These kids are basically refugees and they're asking for our help. We can't let them become lab rats or political prisoners. Kira spoke up for the first time since Hayes had arrived. Gunnery Sergeant Hayes, may I show you something that might help convince your superiors? Hayes nodded, still looking shell-shocked. Kira manipulated the crystal tablet and suddenly the entire apartment was filled with a 3-dimensional star map showing the local region of the galaxy. Red markers indicated conquered systems, while blue markers showed the hegemony's projected expansion path. This is real-time intelligence, Kira explained, updated through quantum entanglement communication with monitoring stations my mother's team established throughout this sector. You can verify the accuracy by comparing it with your own astronomical observations. The map zoomed in on the solar system, showing the positions of all the planets with precision that matched NASA's best data. Then it showed something that made Hayes' breath catch. A small cluster of objects in the asteroid belt that weren't supposed to be there. The debris from our research station, Zara said quietly. It should be visible to your Hubble Space Telescope if you know where to look. Hayes pulled out her laptop and established a secure connection to Quantico. I'm going to patch this directly to Colonel Morrison, she said. He can decide whether to involve the Pentagon. The video call connected, showing Morrison sitting in his office despite the early hour. The colonel was known for keeping irregular hours, but he looked fully alert as Hayes explained the situation. His expression grew increasingly serious as Tank and the girls repeated their story and demonstrated the alien technology. Colonel, Hayes said, I know how this sounds, but I've verified everything I can verify. These aren't special effects. This technology is real, and their intelligence appears to be accurate. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying the holographic displays through the video connection. Rodriguez, you said they specifically asked for Marines. Why? Tank gestured to Zara, who answered directly. Sir, my mother's research indicated that Marine Corps doctrine is uniquely suited to asymmetric warfare against technologically superior opponents. The hegemony has never encountered an enemy that fights the way Marines fight. Explain. Every species they've conquered has followed predictable military logic, Kira added. When faced with overwhelming force, they either surrender or fight conventionally until destroyed. Marines don't follow predictable logic. They improvise, adapt, and refuse to accept defeat even when defeat seems certain. Morrison nodded slowly. And you think that gives us an advantage? Not an advantage, Zara corrected. A chance. The hegemony's tactical algorithms are designed to defeat rational opponents. They've never had to fight someone who gets more dangerous when the situation becomes hopeless. Tank could see Morrison processing this information, weighing the implications. The colonel had commanded Marines in combat. He understood what the girls were describing. What kind of timeline are we looking at? Morrison asked. 6 months until the advance fleet arrives, Kira replied. 18 months until the main invasion force. And you're certain about their capabilities? Zara activated another holographic display, showing detailed technical specifications of hegemony weapons and defenses. Their ships are heavily armored against energy weapons but vulnerable to kinetic impacts. Their shields are designed to deflect plasma bolts, not solid projectiles, and their troops have never fought in close-quarters combat. Morrison studied the data, his expression growing thoughtful. Rodriguez, Hayes, I want you to bring these girls to Pendleton immediately. Full security escort, classified status. I'll contact the Pentagon and arrange for a briefing with Joint Chiefs. Sir, Tank said. What about the girls? They're not prisoners. No, they're not, Morrison agreed. They're refugees seeking asylum. And they're also our best intelligence source about an imminent threat to national security. They'll be treated with respect, but they'll also be protected. Zara looked at Tank. Will you come with us? Mother said to trust the Marines, but you're the first Marine we met. We trust you. Tank looked at Hayes, who nodded. I'll be there, he promised. Morrison's voice came through the laptop speakers. Rodriguez, you realize what you've just gotten yourself into? If this intelligence is accurate, you've just become one of the most important Marines in Corps history. Tank looked at the two small figures sitting on his couch, refugees from a war that had already claimed their mother and was heading toward Earth. 6 months to prepare for a war against an enemy that had never lost, using tactics they'd never encountered. Understood, sir, Tank replied. When do we start? We already have, Morrison said. Pack light. You're going to be very busy for the next 6 months. As Hayes made arrangements for transport to Pendleton, Tank helped the girls gather their few possessions. The crystal tablet went into a special containment case that Zara provided, its surface suddenly opaque and lifeless. Are you scared? Kira asked him as they prepared to leave. Tank considered the question seriously. Terrified, he admitted. But that's okay. Marines do their best work when they're scared. Outside, the first hints of dawn were appearing over San Diego. In 6 months, those same skies might be filled with alien warships, but they'd also be defended by Marines who had never learned how to surrender. The war for humanity was about to begin. 3 weeks later, Tank found himself standing in a classified facility beneath Quantico, watching the most unusual war planning session in human history. The underground complex had been hastily converted into a joint operations center, with representatives from every branch of the military, NASA, the CIA, and several civilian contractors whose security clearances were so high, their names weren't even on the visitor logs. At the center of it all were Zara and Kira, no longer looking like lost refugee children. They'd been provided with proper clothes that fit their small frames, and their alien physiology had adapted remarkably well to Earth's environment. More importantly, they'd become the most valuable intelligence assets in human history. The kinetic bombardment platforms are here, and here, Zara explained, manipulating a holographic display that showed the hegemony fleet formation. The three-dimensional projection filled most of the briefing room, showing massive ships arranged in a pattern that looked almost organic. They use gravitational manipulation to accelerate metallic projectiles to approximately 30% of light speed. General Patricia Williams, the Joint Chiefs representative, leaned forward in her chair. What kind of damage are we talking about? One projectile could eliminate Manhattan, Kira replied matter-of-factly. The kinetic energy release would be equivalent to a 50-megaton nuclear weapon, but without radiation or electromagnetic pulse effects. Tank watched the faces around the table. 3 weeks ago, these people had been planning conventional military operations. Now they were discussing defensive strategies against weapons that existed only in science fiction. However, Zara continued, the bombardment platforms require 17 minutes to recharge between shots, and they must maintain a stationary position relative to their target for accurate targeting. Colonel Jake Harrison from the Air Force Space Command looked up from his tablet. 17 minutes is a long time.
Can we exploit that?
Mother believed so, Kira said. The platforms are heavily armored but not designed for maneuverability. If you could force them to keep repositioning, they'd never get a clear shot, Tank finished. Classic harassment tactics. Hit and run, keep them moving. Never let them settle into a firing position. Dr. Elizabeth Chen from NASA spoke up. The problem is we don't have any assets in space capable of engaging enemy ships. Our most advanced spacecraft are barely capable of reaching low Earth orbit. That's where human ingenuity comes in, said Marcus Webb, a contractor from Lockheed Martin who'd been brought in after demonstrating an unusual ability to think outside conventional parameters. We can't match their technology, but we can use our technology in ways they'd never expect. Webb pulled up his own presentation on the wall display. Zara and Kira have provided us with detailed schematics of hegemony ship construction. Their hulls are designed to deflect energy weapons and high-velocity projectiles, but they've never encountered anything like this. The display showed what looked like a modified ICBM, but instead of a nuclear warhead, it carried a payload of thousands of small metal spheres. Buckshot? General Williams asked. Essentially, yes. Each sphere is made of depleted uranium and titanium alloy, designed to fragment on impact. The hegemony shields can deflect individual high-energy projectiles, but they can't stop 10,000 small ones arriving simultaneously. Tank studied the design with professional interest. Shotgun tactics in space. Crude but effective. The beauty is in the simplicity, Webb continued. We can manufacture these using existing technology and launch them using modified Titan IV rockets. No new technology required, just creative application of old technology. Kira looked concerned. But the hegemony has point defense systems, automated weapons that can destroy incoming projectiles. Which is why we don't send them alone, Tank said, understanding the full scope of the plan. We send thousands of them, all at once, from multiple directions. Admiral Sarah Rodriguez from Naval Intelligence nodded approvingly. Saturation attack. Classic Marine Corps doctrine. When you can't win through superior firepower, win through superior violence of action. Zara manipulated her crystal tablet, running simulations based on the proposed human tactics. The holographic display showed theoretical engagements between human shotgun missiles and hegemony ships. The results were encouraging. While individual missiles were easily destroyed, massive coordinated volleys could overwhelm the alien point defenses. There's something else, Kira said quietly. Mother's research suggested that the hegemony commanders are not used to facing determined resistance. Every species they've conquered either surrendered immediately or fought conventionally until overwhelmed. They've never had to adapt their tactics during a battle, meaning they're inflexible, General Williams concluded. Exactly. Their command structure is highly centralized, optimized for overwhelming weaker opponents quickly. They don't train for prolonged campaigns against adaptive enemies. Tank felt a familiar sensation, the same feeling he'd had before every successful mission in Afghanistan. The enemy had superior equipment and numbers, but they had weaknesses that could be exploited by someone willing to think differently. What about ground combat? He asked. If some of their ships make it through our space defenses, they'll land troops. That's where it gets interesting, Zara said, activating another display. Hegemony ground forces are heavily armored and carry energy weapons, but they've never fought in urban environments or close quarters. Their tactics are designed for open battlefields against conventional armies. The display showed typical hegemony infantry, tall, heavily armored figures carrying weapons that looked like they belonged in a space opera. They moved in formation, maintaining precise spacing and coordinated fire patterns. They fight like they've never been shot at by someone hiding in a building, Tank observed. Standard formation tactics, no individual initiative. Marines specialize in close quarters combat, Colonel Harrison noted. Room to room, building to building. Urban warfare. The hegemony has conquered 47 species, Kira said. None of them fought the way humans fight. None of them had Marines. Dr. Chen pulled up a global map showing major population centers. If we can force them into urban combat zones, deny them the open battlefields they're used to, we turn every city into a fortress, Tank said. Make them fight for every block, every building. Bleed them in a dozen different fights instead of letting them win one big battle. Admiral Rodriguez looked thoughtful. We'd need to completely restructure our defensive planning. Instead of trying to stop them at the beaches, we'd let them land and then make them pay for every inch of territory. It worked in Stalingrad, General Williams said grimly. And Fallujah. Urban combat favors the defender, especially when the defender knows the terrain and the attacker doesn't. Tank looked at the alien children who had somehow become the most important strategic advisors in human history. Your mother was right. The hegemony has never fought anyone who fights like humans. The question is, Webb said, can we manufacture enough weapons and train enough troops in 6 months? We can try, General Williams said. And if we can't manufacture enough conventional weapons, we'll improvise. Marines are good at improvising. Zara looked up at Tank with her large luminescent eyes. Mother said Marines never retreat. Is that true? Tank considered the question seriously. Sometimes we advance in a different direction. But we never stop fighting. Good, Kira said with satisfaction, because the hegemony doesn't know how to fight someone who never stops fighting. As the briefing session continued into the evening, Tank found himself thinking about the impossible odds they faced. 6 months to prepare for war against an enemy that had conquered nearly 50 other species. It should have been hopeless. Instead, he felt something he'd experienced in every successful mission he'd ever been part of. The absolute certainty that Marines would find a way to win. Regardless of the odds, the enemy had superior technology, overwhelming numbers, and thousands of years of military experience. But they'd never faced an enemy that considered impossible odds just another day at the office. Time to show the galaxy what Marines could do when properly motivated. Tank was monitoring communications from the tactical center beneath Cheyenne Mountain when the war began. After 6 months of frantic preparation, the moment everyone had dreaded and prepared for finally arrived with clinical precision. Contact, announced Lieutenant Commander Sarah Park from Space Command. Multiple vessels decelerating from faster-than-light travel, bearing 270 Mark 15. Range, 4 million kilometers and closing. The main display showed the Hegemony Advance Fleet as it materialized in the outer solar system. 12 massive ships, each one dwarfing anything humanity had ever built, arranged in the same formation Zara and Kira had predicted. At the center, the command vessel, a kilometer-long monster bristling with weapons that could glass an entire planet. Assessment? General Williams asked calmly. Fleet composition matches intelligence projections exactly, replied Major Torres from the analysis team. 3 bombardment platforms, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 troop transports, and 1 command ship. They're maintaining formation and heading directly for Earth. Tank looked across the command center to where Zara and Kira sat at their own workstation, monitoring the enemy fleet through their crystal tablet. The girls had grown more serious over the past 6 months, losing some of their childlike innocence as they helped prepare humanity for war. Now they watched their mother's killers approach Earth with expressions of cold determination that belonged on much older faces. Time to weapons range? Williams asked. 18 hours at current velocity, Park reported. They're decelerating for orbital insertion. Phase 1 is authorized, Williams announced. All units initiate buckshot protocol. Across the globe, modified ICBM silos opened their doors. From Vandenberg Air Force Base, Cape Canaveral, Plesetsk Cosmodrome, and a dozen other launch facilities, humanity's first space-based military operation began, not with advanced alien technology or energy weapons, but with hundreds of modified ballistic missiles carrying thousands of depleted uranium spheres. Birds are flying, reported Colonel Harrison from Space Command. 237 missiles launched. Time to target, 6 hours. The first phase of humanity's defense plan was beautifully simple. Instead of trying to match hegemony technology, they would overwhelm it with sheer volume. Every missile carried a payload designed to fragment into thousands of small projectiles, creating massive shotgun blasts in space. Enemy response? Williams asked. No change in formation or velocity, Park reported. They don't appear to consider our missiles a threat. That was exactly what Tank had hoped to hear. The hegemony was used to facing energy weapons and high-tech projectiles that could be individually tracked and destroyed. They weren't prepared for old-fashioned kinetic warfare on a massive scale. 6 hours later, the first wave of human missiles reached the enemy fleet. Impact in 10 seconds, Park announced, all missiles functioning normally. Tank watched the tactical display as hundreds of small icons representing human missiles converged on the hegemony fleet. Point defense systems activated on the alien ships, destroying individual missiles with precise energy bursts. But for every missile they destroyed, 10 more continued their approach. Impact, Park said quietly. The display erupted in chaos. Thousands of depleted uranium spheres struck the hegemony shield simultaneously, creating a light show visible even from Earth. The alien ships disappeared behind clouds of metal fragments and energy discharges. Damage assessment? Williams demanded. Kira's fingers flew across her crystal tablet, accessing hegemony communication networks through methods Tank didn't pretend to understand. 2 heavy cruisers have lost shield integrity, she reported. 1 bombardment platform is showing engine damage. The command ship is intact but has diverted power to defensive systems. Tank felt a surge of satisfaction. They'd hurt the enemy. Not destroyed them, but hurt them enough to get their attention. Enemy response? Williams asked. They're breaking formation, Park reported with surprise in her voice. Command ship is falling back while the heavy cruisers advance. This doesn't match their predicted tactical doctrine. Zara looked up from her tablet with something approaching a smile. They're adapting. Mother said they would be forced to adapt if we made their standard tactics ineffective. Is that good or bad? Tank asked. Good, Kira replied. It means they're thinking like tacticians instead of following predetermined algorithms. And Mother's research showed that hegemony field commanders aren't very good at improvisation. Phase 2, Williams announced. All ground forces to defensive positions. Space Command, prepare for orbital bombardment. This was the part Tank had been dreading. The bombardment platforms would target major population centers, trying to break human resistance through overwhelming firepower. But humanity's response would force them to choose between military effectiveness and their own survival. The first bombardment began 3 hours later. A lance of energy reached down from space, striking an evacuated section of the Nevada desert with the force of a nuclear weapon. The ground vaporized instantly, creating a crater 2 kilometers wide. Orbital strike confirmed, Park reported. The bombardment platform is recharging for secondary strike. Time to recharge? Williams asked. 17 minutes as predicted, Kira confirmed. That 17-minute window was humanity's opportunity. As the bombardment platform recharged, a second wave of shotgun missiles launched from concealed silos, targeting the now stationary alien ship. But this time the missiles carried a different payload. EMP warheads armed and functional, reported Major Torres. Detonation in 30 seconds. The electromagnetic pulse weapons weren't designed to destroy the alien ships. Human technology wasn't advanced enough for that. But they would disrupt the sensitive electronics that controlled the aliens' point defense systems, creating brief windows of vulnerability. The EMP detonations lit up space like artificial suns. For 30 seconds, the bombardment platform's defenses went dark, leaving it vulnerable to the kinetic kill vehicles that followed immediately behind. This time, the depleted uranium spheres found their target. The alien ship's armor held, but its weapon systems did not. The bombardment platform went silent, drifting powerless in space. 1 bombardment platform neutralized, Park announced. Remaining platforms are changing tactics. They're maintaining mobile positions instead of stationary firing positions. Tank nodded approvingly. Good. Force them to choose between accuracy and survival. The pattern continued for 8 hours. Every time a hegemony ship tried to establish a bombardment position, human missiles forced it to move. The aliens were more powerful, but they were being forced to fight on humanity's terms. Constant movement, no time to establish secure firing positions, always looking over their shoulders. Enemy ground forces are deploying, Park reported as the tactical situation evolved. 2 troop transports are moving toward atmospheric entry. This was what Tank had been waiting for. Space combat favored whoever had the best technology, but ground combat was different. Ground combat was where Marines made their living. All ground units, this is General Williams, came the announcement over the communications network. Enemy forces are inbound to population centers Alpha and Charlie. You know your jobs. Make them pay for every inch. Tank looked at the deployment map showing major cities that had been evacuated and turned into urban fortresses. Los Angeles and Chicago had been transformed into killing fields, with every building, every street corner, every rooftop prepared for the kind of close-quarters combat that Marines specialized in. Atmospheric entry in 2 minutes, Park announced. Zara and Kira watched their tablets intently as the hegemony troop transports descended toward Earth. Tank could see the tension in their small faces. This was the moment when humanity would either prove their mother's theories correct or die trying. Marines, Tank said into his communicator, addressing the thousands of troops waiting in defensive positions across 2 major cities. Remember what these bastards did to the girl's mother? Remember that they've never lost a war. Remember that they've never fought Marines. He paused, looking at Zara and Kira, who nodded encouragingly. Today we teach them that there's a first time for everything. Semper Fi. Semper Fi, came the response from thousands of voices across the communications network. The troop transports touched down in the center of Los Angeles and Chicago simultaneously, disgorging thousands of heavily armored hegemony soldiers into what they thought would be a quick, urban pacification operation. Instead, they walked into the most sophisticated urban ambush in military history, designed by people who had been perfecting the art of city fighting for over 2 centuries. The real war was about to begin. Tank monitored the urban battle from his position in a reinforced bunker, 3 blocks from the Los Angeles landing zone, watching through helmet cameras as Marines turned the city into a maze of death for the hegemony forces. The aliens had expected to face a conventional army in open terrain. Instead, they found themselves fighting ghosts in a concrete jungle designed to kill them. Bravo, Company. This is Rodriguez. Tank spoke into his communicator as he watched hegemony soldiers advance down Wilshire Boulevard in perfect formation. Target-rich environment approaching your position. Wait for my signal. The alien soldiers moved like they were on parade. Precise spacing, coordinated movements. Energy weapons held at identical angles. They'd been trained to fight conventional armies on open battlefields, not Marines hiding in buildings with improvised weapons. Wait for it, Tank murmured, watching the aliens approach the kill zone. Marine snipers were positioned in windows 50 floors up, while demolition teams waited in basements and parking garages. Every building had been turned into a fortress, every street corner into an ambush point. The hegemony soldiers reached the intersection of Wilshire and Western. Tank smiled grimly. Light them up. The street erupted in controlled chaos. Sniper fire from multiple buildings struck the alien formation simultaneously, while improvised explosive devices hidden in storm drains and subway tunnels detonated beneath their feet. The aliens' energy shields protected them from individual shots, but they couldn't defend against attacks from 6 different directions at once. First squad is down, reported Staff Sergeant Maria Santos from her position in a parking garage, but they're adapting faster than expected. Second wave is taking cover and returning coordinated fire. Tank switched to another camera feed showing the Chicago operation. The pattern was similar. Initial success followed by rapid alien adaptation. The hegemony soldiers were learning from their casualties, adjusting their tactics to deal with urban warfare. They're not stupid, he muttered, watching alien troops begin using their energy weapons to blast through building walls instead of entering through doors and windows. They're just inexperienced. Rodriguez, this is Colonel Morrison, came the voice through his earpiece. We're getting reports from both theaters. The aliens are adapting to building combat faster than anticipated. Tank had expected this. The hegemony hadn't conquered 47 civilizations by being inflexible. They were learning to fight in cities, but they were learning by trial and error, paying for each lesson with casualties. Understood, sir. Initiating Phase 3. Phase 3 was the most dangerous part of the plan. Instead of trying to hold fixed positions, Marine units would become completely mobile, turning the urban environment into a 3-dimensional battlefield where the enemy's superior firepower became a liability. All units, this is Rodriguez, Tank announced. Serpentine protocol is now active. Break contact and relocate. Turn this into hide-and-seek with live ammunition. Tank left his bunker and moved through the evacuation tunnels that connected every major building in the combat zone. 6 months of preparation had turned downtown Los Angeles into the most sophisticated urban fortress in history, with concealed passages, hidden weapon caches, and communication networks that allowed Marines to appear anywhere at any time. He emerged in a department store 2 blocks away, where Gunnery Sergeant Hayes was coordinating a squad of Marines armed with modified rocket-propelled grenades. The weapons had been specially designed to exploit a weakness Zara and Kira had identified in hegemony armor. The joints and power connections were vulnerable to shaped charges that could Penetrate without triggering the energy. Shields, status report, Gunny, Tank said, joining Hayes at her observation post. We've taken down maybe 30 of them in the last hour, Hayes replied, indicating the alien soldiers visible through the store windows. But they're getting smarter. They've stopped advancing in formation and started using their heavy weapons to demolish buildings, instead of clearing them room by room. Tank watched as a hegemony soldier fired an energy weapon that vaporized the front wall of a coffee shop across the street. The alien tactics were crude but effective. If you couldn't safely enter a building, you simply destroyed it. Time to teach them why that's a bad idea, Tank said. He activated his communicator and spoke to Marine units throughout the city. All squads with demo charges target structural supports on buildings currently occupied by enemy forces. Wait for them to get comfortable, then bring the roof down on their heads. The plan was brutally simple. The hegemony soldiers were taking shelter in buildings they'd cleared, using them as strong points to control intersections and major streets. But buildings that provided protection could also become traps if the structural supports were destroyed at the right moment. Demo. Charges set, reported Corporal Jackson from his position in the subway, tunnels beneath a bank building. 12 aliens have taken position on the ground floor. All units report ready, Hayes added, coordinating with squads throughout the combat zone. Tank waited until the alien forces had settled into their positions, confident that they controlled the key terrain. Then he gave the order that turned their strong points into tombs. Execute. Across downtown Los Angeles, carefully placed explosive charges detonated simultaneously. Buildings that the hegemony had occupied collapsed in carefully controlled demolitions, burying alien soldiers beneath tons of concrete and steel. The aliens' energy shields were useless against the crushing weight of an entire building. Effective hits on 7 positions, Hayes reported with satisfaction. Estimated 40 to 50 enemy casualties. But Tank's celebration was cut short by an urgent transmission from the command center. All units, this is General Williams. We're detecting massive energy buildups from the orbital platforms. They're preparing for full-scale bombardment of both combat zones. Tank felt his stomach drop. The hegemony commanders had apparently decided that precision urban combat was too costly. They were going to solve the problem by destroying the cities entirely. Evacuation protocols, Hayes asked. Negative, Tank replied, checking his tactical display. If we evacuate, they'll level every major city until we surrender. We have to make them afraid to use orbital bombardment. He switched to a secure channel that connected him directly to Zara and Kira at the command center. Girls, I need options. How do we make them afraid to bombard the cities? Kira's voice came through clearly despite the sound of explosions in the background. The bombardment platforms are maintaining geosynchronous orbit directly above the combat zones. If you could get a targeting laser on one of them. Our missiles can't reach orbital altitude, Tank interrupted. No, but theirs can, Zara said with excitement in her voice. If you could capture one of their heavy weapons and modify it. Tank understood immediately. The aliens' own energy weapons were powerful enough to reach their orbital platforms. If Marines could capture and redirect one of those weapons. Hayes, get me a demo team and the best electronics technician in the battalion, Tank ordered. We're going alien hunting. 20 minutes later, Tank was leading a 12-man team through the storm sewers toward a hegemony strongpoint that intelligence had identified as a heavy weapons position. The aliens had established a firebase in Pershing Square, using their energy cannons to support troops throughout the downtown area. Remember, Tank told his team as they prepared for the assault, we need at least one of those weapons intact. Dead aliens are good, but captured alien weapons are better. The assault began with flashbang grenades thrown simultaneously from storm drains surrounding the square. The aliens' enhanced vision, adapted for low-light environments, made them particularly vulnerable to sudden bright lights. While they were temporarily blinded, Marines emerged from concealed positions and attacked with close-range weapons designed to penetrate hegemony armor. The battle lasted 3 minutes. When it was over, 12 hegemony soldiers were dead and 3 heavy energy weapons were in Marine hands. Can you make this work? Tank asked Sergeant Chen, the electronics specialist who was already examining the captured alien weapon. Give me 10 minutes, Chen replied, connecting human power supplies to the alien technology. The targeting system is quantum-based, but the basic principles are the same as any directed energy weapon. 8 minutes later, Chen looked up with a grin. Ready to shoot, Staff Sergeant. Tank activated his communicator. Command, this is Rodriguez. We have acquired alien heavy weapons and are prepared to engage orbital targets. Rodriguez, are you insane? Came General Williams' voice. You're talking about shooting at spaceships with captured alien weapons. Yes, sir. With respect, sir, that's exactly what I'm talking about. There was a long pause. Then Williams's voice returned, tinged with what might have been amusement. This is either the stupidest idea in military history or the most brilliant. Proceed. Tank aimed the captured energy weapon at the sky, using targeting data provided by Zara and Kira to locate the bombardment platform hanging in geosynchronous orbit above Los Angeles. The weapon charged with a sound like thunder, building energy that made the air around it shimmer with heat. Firing, Tank announced. The energy beam lanced upward, invisible to the naked eye, but clearly visible on every sensor in the solar. 6 months after the Battle of Los Angeles, Tank stood on the observation deck of humanity's first orbital defense platform, watching construction crews install weapon systems that combined human ingenuity with captured hegemony technology. The platform, built from the wreckage of the bombardment ship he'd shot down, had become a symbol of something the galaxy had never seen before, a species that grew stronger by defeating its enemies. The reinforcement fleet will arrive in 3 weeks, Zara announced, studying data on her crystal tablet as she joined Tank at the observation window. At 10 years old, she'd become humanity's chief intelligence analyst for hegemony military operations, a position that would have been absurd if not for the fact that she was better at the job than any human. How many ships? Tank asked, though he already knew the answer would be bad news. 47 vessels, Kira replied, appearing beside her sister, including 5 siege platforms and 12 troop carriers. The Hegemony High Command has classified Earth as a priority threat, requiring full military response. Tank nodded grimly. The first battle had been won, but it had also painted a target on Earth that could be seen from across the galaxy. Word had spread that humans were different, that they fought in ways no other species had ever fought, and that they'd somehow managed to defeat a hegemony advance fleet. Any good news? He asked. Actually, yes, Zara said with one of her rare smiles. We're not alone anymore. She activated her tablet and the space around them filled with a holographic display, showing the local galactic region. Red markers still indicated hegemony-controlled systems, but now there were green markers as well. Dozens of them, scattered across multiple star systems. Species that the hegemony conquered years ago are starting to rebel, Kira explained. Our victory proved that the hegemony can be defeated. Resistance movements are forming on occupied worlds throughout this sector. Tank studied the display with professional interest. They're coordinating? Mother's research network was more extensive than we initially realized, Zara said. She'd been in contact with resistance groups on 17 different worlds. When news of Earth's victory reached them through quantum communications, they began planning coordinated uprisings. The implications were staggering. Earth's refusal to surrender hadn't just saved humanity. It had sparked a galactic rebellion against an empire that had seemed invincible. There's more, Kira added. 3 systems have declared their independence and requested military assistance. They want Marines. Tank felt a familiar surge of pride. 6 months ago, Marines had been an obscure branch of one species' military on a backwater planet. Now they were being requested by name across multiple star systems. What's the Pentagon's response? Expansion, came General Williams's voice as she approached their group. The general had been promoted to head the newly created Department of Galactic Operations, a position that would have been considered science fiction a year ago. Congress has authorized the formation of an interstellar Marine Corps, with an initial deployment of 50,000 Marines to support Allied operations. Tank whistled softly. 50,000 Marines spread across multiple star systems. That's a lot of territory to cover. Which is why we're not doing it alone, Williams continued. The species we're supporting are providing transportation, logistics, and local intelligence. Marines provide the tactical expertise and the psychological warfare effect. Psychological warfare? Tank asked. Word about Marine Corps tactics has spread faster than hegemony reinforcements, Williams explained. Enemy commanders who previously expected quick victories are now planning for extended campaigns. Morale on hegemony-controlled worlds is dropping because occupied populations believe liberation is possible. Zara pulled up another display showing intelligence reports from across the galaxy. The Hegemony High Command is having to redeploy forces from expansion operations to deal with rebellions on previously conquered worlds. Their entire strategic timeline has been disrupted. Tank considered this. So instead of facing one unstoppable force expanding outward, they're now fighting a dozen smaller wars across their entire empire. Exactly, Kira confirmed. Classic insurgency tactics applied on a galactic scale. Death by 1,000 cuts. But the fleet heading for Earth is still coming, Williams pointed out. 47 ships with orders to make an example of humanity. We need to be ready. Tank looked out at the construction activity around the orbital platform. Human shipyards were working around the clock to build a fleet using hybrid technology. Human engineering principles applied to alien materials and power sources. The results weren't as advanced as pure hegemony technology, but they were far more adaptable and easier to repair in combat. How many ships will we have ready? He asked. 16 frigates, 8 destroyers, and 3 heavy cruisers, Williams replied, plus this platform and its sister station over New York. Not enough to match them ship for ship, but enough to make them fight for every inch of space. And if they decide to just bombard the planet from extreme range, Zara smiled, and Tank was reminded that despite her childlike appearance, she had one of the most devious military minds he'd ever encountered. They can't. The rebellion is spreading too fast. If they spend months systematically destroying Earth, they'll lose a dozen other systems while they're occupied here. They have to win quickly, Kira added, which means they have to fight the way we want them to fight. Tank nodded with satisfaction. The strategic situation had shifted from humanity facing impossible odds to humanity controlling the terms of engagement. The hegemony was being forced to react to human initiatives instead of following their own plans. There's something else, Williams said. The president wants to offer you a commission. Colonel Rodriguez has a nice ring to it. Tank was quiet for a moment, considering the offer. 6 months ago, he'd been a staff sergeant looking forward to retirement. Now he was being offered a chance to help lead humanity's expansion into the galaxy. What would my assignment be? Command of the 1st Interstellar Marine Regiment, Williams replied. Your job would be to take Marines to other worlds and teach them how to fight the way Marines fight. Tank looked at Zara and Kira, who were watching him with expressions of hopeful anticipation. These 2 small aliens had changed everything by knocking on his door one night, trusting that Marines would know what to do when faced with impossible odds. I'll take it, he said, but I have 2 conditions. Name them. First, I want Gunnery Sergeant Hayes as my senior enlisted advisor. She's the best Marine I've ever served with. Done. Second condition? Tank gestured toward the girls. Zara and Kira come with us. They're not just intelligence assets. They're Marines now, even if they're too young to officially enlist. And Marines don't leave other Marines behind. Williams smiled. I think that can be arranged. The girls have already requested assignment as cultural liaison specialists. 3 weeks later, Tank stood on the bridge of the UES Leatherneck, humanity's first interstellar warship. Watching the approaching hegemony fleet on the tactical display, the enemy had arrived exactly on schedule, 47 ships strong and confident in their ability to crush the upstart humans who had dared to resist galactic order. All stations report ready, announced Captain Rebecca Torres, the ship's commanding officer and Tank's former battalion commander. Marine assault shuttles are loaded and standing by. Enemy fleet is maintaining standard approach formation, reported Zara from her position at the intelligence station. They're not adapting to our demonstrated capabilities, Tank smiled grimly. The hegemony commanders were making the same mistake their advance fleet had made, assuming that humans would fight like every other species they'd conquered. All ships. This is Colonel Rodriguez, Tank announced over the fleet communications network. Remember, we're not trying to win a conventional space battle. We're trying to teach them that fighting humans is more expensive than they can afford. Sir, Kira called from her station. Incoming transmission from the hegemony fleet. They're demanding immediate surrender. Put it through, Tank said. The main display showed a hegemony commander, tall, armored, with the bearing of someone who had never experienced defeat. When it spoke, its voice carried the absolute confidence of inevitable victory. Human vessels, you are outmatched and outnumbered. Surrender now and your species will be granted servant status within the hegemony. Continue resistance and you will be eliminated entirely. Tank looked around the bridge at his Marines, at the alien children who had become part of his family, at the officers and crew who had volunteered for humanity's most dangerous mission. Then he activated the transmission. Hegemony Fleet, this is Colonel Marcus Rodriguez, United Earth Space Marines. We have your surrender demand. Our response is as follows. Nuts. He cut the transmission and turned to Captain Torres. Take us to battle stations, Captain. Let's show them what happens when you threaten Marines. As the human fleet accelerated toward an enemy that had never lost a war, Tank felt the same confidence he'd experienced in every successful mission of his career. The odds were impossible, the enemy was stronger, and victory seemed hopeless. In other words, it was exactly the kind of situation Marines were designed for. Semper Fi, he said quietly, watching the tactical display as two fleets,